I had packed my suitcase the night before, not the pink, rattling kind kids drag through airports, but a silver one, quiet, compact, like me. Inside were a suit for the London conference, a sweater for the weekend in the Cotswolds, and my old notebook that's followed me through every business trip. That morning, I FaceTimed my mom. She asked, "Are you going on vacation?" I smiled. "Business trip, Mom. But I'll sneak in a few real days off. You should be proud. I'm finally learning how to rest." She laughed. "Let's hope no one ruins it this time." She didn't know how right she was. The 15th floor conference room at Metasphere glowed in that cold, white LED light that makes everyone look slightly washed out. I sat in the middle row, coffee steaming beside my laptop, slides ready. In 10 years, no one had ever raised their voice at me in that room until that morning. Jason Reed, the new CEO, walked in. He'd been here less than 2 weeks, yet moved like he'd invented the concept of modern leadership. Crisp white shirt, rehearsed smile, and the gaze of a man who thought an MBA could replace experience. He started his speech like every self-declared savior does. "We need a mindset shift. No more unnecessary spending. No more luxury business trips. We're not sponsoring European vacations disguised as work." The room chuckled, short, dry laughter, the kind you make to keep your job. I didn't. Then Jason's eyes found me. Same smile, only colder. "Emma, I see you have a flight to London next week, right? Cancel it. From now on, we'll manage licenses remotely. Send all the documents to Leah. We don't need to fly halfway across the world just to sign a few papers." His tone was polite, almost gentle, like a compliment wrapped in sandpaper. I set my cup down, the porcelain tapping lightly against the table. "Sure," I said. Just one word, sharp as a period ending a chapter I knew wouldn't close quietly. He nodded and went on about speed and optimization, like he'd just discovered both. I looked out the window. The Bay Bridge lay shrouded in fog, the water below still as glass. I thought of the meetings in London, the European officials. I'd built relationships with over 8 years, the espresso bar near my hotel where they called me by name, not by title. And I thought, how fascinating. It only takes 2 weeks for someone to believe they understand a system I've kept alive for a decade. When the meeting ended, Jason walked past my table. "We need fresh thinking, Emma. Doing things the old way doesn't make them right." I looked up, calm. "Maybe, but not everything new is better." He smiled, the kind of smile that listens to no one, just waits for its turn to speak. Then he walked off, leaving behind cologne and cold air. I opened my email and typed, "London trip canceled per CEO request. Files to be transferred to Leah for processing." Then I pulled my suitcase closer, leaving it beside my desk like an abandoned cat waiting by the door. I checked the European license renewal date, June 17th. I added a note to myself, no reminders. Forget Ishaw's fine. At lunch, I ate with Mark, the only person in the building who still talked to me like a human. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said, taking a sip of water. "My vacation just ended before it began." That trip mattered, I shrugged. It mattered to me. To them, it was just a plane ticket. That afternoon, I handed access over to Leah, the new assistant. Bright, fast, and the same one who'd asked me last week if EU compliance was a makeup brand. I sent an email with instructions, contact lists, timelines, and templates. Final line, "Please confirm receipt and monitor submission deadlines." No reply. That night, I went home and placed the suitcase on my bed without opening it. The e-ticket still showed a reminder to check in early. I deleted it. My reflection in the screen looked calm. No anger, no sadness, just the steady eyes of someone who's weathered too many storms and knows that when the wind stops, that's when danger begins. I poured a glass of red wine, glanced at the suitcase, and said softly, "Fine. He canceled my flight, but he just booked himself a one-way ticket to trouble." I sat there, the glass in my hand, the lamplight spilling across the dark wooden table. The city hummed outside, steady, and indifferent, like time itself counting down. Silence can be louder than words sometimes. You know that feeling, don't you? That moment when you've just been dismissed, but instead of reacting, you simply observe. Watching someone tie the rope around their own neck, thinking it's a necktie. I know many of you have felt that too, when your work is brushed aside with a flick of the hand, when someone new walks in and acts like history began with them. I don't blame Jason. People like him always believe the map starts where they stand. I just smiled, because I knew what happens when they start walking without looking where they're going. If you've ever had a Jason in your life, you know exactly what I mean. Tell me where you're listening from, maybe in your car on the drive home, or in your kitchen while making dinner. I want you to remember this feeling because it's coming back in ways you won't see coming. And if you love stories of quiet revenge, the kind that doesn't need shouting or slamming doors, just patience and timing, don't forget to subscribe. This story is only getting started. I went back to the office the next morning. Same coffee mug, same desk by the window overlooking Mission Street. But something was different. The air. That strange quiet that follows a storm, when everyone knows something has happened but no one dares to speak of it. On my way to my seat, I saw a new face. Leah Tran, Jason's young assistant. Early 20s, hair tied high, beige office dress, one hand on a laptop, the other holding a smoothie cup the size of a fire hydrant. The bright smile of someone who hadn't yet learned through failure. Jason introduced her during the morning huddle. This is Leah. She'll be assisting me directly and handling coordination for international filings. We're transitioning old processes to a new model, paperless, efficient, no unnecessary travel. When he said old processes, he looked right at me, like I was an outdated Excel file waiting to be uninstalled. I nodded, said nothing. When everyone left, I walked to Leah's desk. She was sorting shared folders, muttering under her breath as if memorizing vocabulary. I'm Emma, I said. I heard you'll be handling the EU filings. Leah turned, friendly but a little tense. Yes, the boss said you'd share the relevant materials. He mentioned everything's digital now. I smiled. Sure, I've got a few things you'll need, including some that aren't on the system yet. That afternoon, I drafted an email. Subject line, EU regulatory package for transition. I attached everything. Contact lists for European authorities, step-by-step filing instructions, annotated notes on deadlines, even the small unwritten rules I'd learned over 8 years. Finally, I added one line. Please confirm receipt and ensure deadlines are tracked. I stared at it for a few seconds, then added a period. Then another. A quiet way to say I wasn't waiting. No reply. The day moved slowly, as if the air itself was waiting. Jason passed by my desk several times, just enough to remind me that he could. He liked standing in hallways, speaking louder than necessary, making sure people looked up. From my corner, I worked in silence, sorting old folders, transferring permissions. I used to be the only one holding. By midweek, Mark, the head of engineering, stopped by. He set a coffee cup on my desk, half teasing, half concerned. I heard Jason told Leah to handle the EU renewals. Is that true? That's what I heard. That kid doesn't even know how to use the filing system, Emma. I smiled. Everyone learns eventually. He watched me, waiting for a reaction, but I just sipped my coffee. You're not worried? Worried? I looked up, voice calm as air. I'm just watching how fast they learn. That afternoon, Jason sent a company-wide email about a culture of innovation and agile thinking. At the bottom, it read, Legacy systems slow us down. Let's build something better. I saved a copy to a new folder I titled Archive Insurance, an old habit born from watching people dig their own holes. The next day, Leah finally replied with a short message. No punctuation, no sign-off. Thanks, I got it. I'll keep track. That was it. No questions, no confirmation, no awareness of the deadline. I stared at the screen, wondering how long until that I'll keep track turned into I thought Jason handled it. A week passed. Jason grew more confident in his reforms. He began holding quick morning stand-up meetings where everyone had to report progress in under 3 minutes. He talked about efficiency, cost optimization, and streamlined staffing. The words floated past me like soap bubbles, pretty, hollow, and gone the second they touched reality. Now and then, he'd throw in a subtle jab. Some people still prefer doing things the old way, but we're moving forward. The room would go quiet. A few glances flickered my way. I just smiled. I didn't need to take notes. My memory was sharp enough to keep every word. Late Friday afternoon, Mark came by again. "I'm guessing you're still saving everything?" "I save everything," I said. He nodded, lowering his voice. "If anyone can keep this ship from sinking, it's probably you." I looked at him, the last light of the day glinting off my desk. I used to keep it afloat. Now they want to rebuild it. I'm just watching to see if it holds. I left the office after dark. The elevator mirrored my reflection, half in shadow, half in gold. In my bag, a small USB drive sat quietly, the complete backup of everything I'd transferred. No one knew I had it. No one asked. Sometimes silence is the best defense, and sometimes it's the first warning. The next month played out like a show I'd seen too many times. Jason turned the office into his own stage. He talked louder, walked faster, smiled wider, and every time he spoke, it became a sermon about innovation. At my age, you learn to tell the difference between confidence and showmanship. Jason was pure showmanship. People liked him, at least at first. He looked exactly like the kind of leader business magazines love to glorify: young, energetic, fluent in buzzwords that make investors nod. He hosted a vision day, invited the marketing team, handed out donuts, and called it a culture reboot. Cheap PR, but effective. And of course, in his talk, he couldn't resist bringing up outdated processes. "We've relied on legacy models for too long," he declared, voice firm as if saving the economy. "We need to move faster, learner. No more costly trips, no more paper stacks." Someone asked, "What about the EU license renewals?" Jason smiled, the kind of smile that makes you want to spill your coffee just to break it. "Leah and I have streamlined the entire process. Now it only takes a few clicks." I sat in the back row, coffee in hand, listening like a paying audience member. He didn't say my name, but I could feel the look he threw my way, the look of a man convinced he's outdone his predecessor. That afternoon, in a smaller meeting room, I was asked to share insights. Jason stood at the whiteboard, marker in hand, and wrote "Agility" in big capital letters. "What we need is flexibility," he said, "not rigid rules." I spoke softly, just enough for the room to hear. "Flexibility doesn't replace accountability, Jason." He gave a tight smile. "Maybe we just see things differently, Emma." I nodded. "That's fine. As long as the system breaks, the person in charge is brave enough to admit it." No one said a word. My coffee cup made a small click against the table as I set it down. After the meeting, Mark waited for me in the hallway. "You know he's not going to stop, right?" "I don't need him to stop," I said. "I just need him to keep going, all the way." But I wasn't entirely indifferent. Beneath Jason's confidence, I started to notice the cracks. The way he paused too long whenever an email came from investors, how his voice changed pitch when he mentioned quarterly targets. And then I overheard HR whisper that at his previous company, Jason had been forced out after a compliance project got suspended. Apparently, he still treated the word compliance like profanity. Maybe that's why he disliked me from day one. One Monday morning, I walked in to find my old process board removed from the wall. In its place hung a new poster: "Move fast or move out." I stood there watching it flutter slightly under the air vent. It looked more like a threat than a slogan. Jason appeared behind me. "Looks more modern, doesn't it?" "I'm not sure," I said. "But at least it's honest." He tilted his head. "What do you mean?" "I have a feeling it'll turn out to be prophecy rather than branding." He laughed, a stiff little sound he mistook for confidence, and walked away. For a brief second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. After that, I spoke less in meetings. When he presented his process optimization plan, I just took notes. No comments, no corrections. I saved everything: meeting minutes, emails, messages, even his hallway remarks. Leah was still buzzing around with her laptop, sending daily reports no one read. She was like a rookie trying to defuse a bomb by pressing every button at once. June arrived. I checked my calendar. The 17th is circled in red, the final deadline for the EU license renewal. I added a sticky note to my monitor. Deadline, June 17th. No reminders. Mark saw it and asked quietly, "You're not planning to warn them?" I shook my head. Nobody wants the night watchman shouting fire while they're dreaming. I closed my laptop and looked out the window. Afternoon light poured across the poster. Move fast or move out. I took a sip of cold coffee and thought, yes, they're moving fast. They just don't see the cliff ahead. June 1st came like any other month. No alarms, no shift in the wind, just the usual cold, bright mornings of the office. But something quiet began to move underneath, like an undercurrent only someone who's been here long enough could feel. I noticed it when Leah started talking about her new project. She told Mark that Jason had approved automation of the European license renewal process. I overheard it as I passed by, just a casual comment, but it made me pause mid-step. Automation. Now that word had never belonged anywhere near German regulators. They liked paper, stamps, and wet signatures. In their world, automation was just a polite way to say, we skipped the important parts. I said nothing. I just opened my calendar. June 17th sat there, circled in red months ago. I added a new reminder on my phone, just for me. Countdown, 16 days. Jason was in his glory days. He'd been featured in the local business journal, talking about young leadership and startup thinking. He preached about cutting administrative waste and taking Metasphere global. At the office, he moved through rows of desks like a man fresh off a victory stage. Every time he said lean structure, I thought of those audit reports I used to finish at 3 in the morning, checking every line, every decimal, making sure we were legal down to the comma. Mark stopped by my desk, voice low. "Emma, I checked the license tracking system. Looks like Leah hasn't updated anything since mid-May." I asked, "Did she say why?" "She said she's waiting for a response from the regulator." I gave a small laugh. "I guess they're still automating that response." That night, I stayed late. The office was empty, just the hum of the air vents filling the silence. I opened my old folders and backed up everything: contracts, compliance files, signed reports, even the email threads with Berlin. One copy for the company, one for me. Not because I didn't trust anyone, but because I learned how quickly people forget to thank the one who saved them the first time, and how easily they blame that same person the second. The next morning, Jason called a quick meeting. He walked in beaming. "Good news. We just saved over $8,000 by canceling that London trip. That's real productivity, people." The room laughed, a dull plastic kind of laugh, like chairs scraping the floor. I just looked at him, said nothing. I knew what that $8,000 would really cost. It just hadn't shown up on his balance sheet yet. June 14th, an internal email went out from finance. Update on EU license renewal progress. Leah didn't reply. Neither did Jason. On the 15th, I saw her in the pantry, stirring her smoothie while laughing into her phone. I asked lightly, as if it were nothing, "Leah, did you get the confirmation from Berlin yet?" She hesitated for half a second. "Oh, I think so. They send those automatically, right?" "No," I said. "In Germany, nothing's automatic except trains." That night, my inbox was empty. No messages, no alerts, and it didn't matter. I knew what was coming, and I knew I shouldn't, stop it. Jason had ordered all direct compliance intervention to cease. He wanted control. He was about to have it. At 3:42 a.m. on June 17th, I woke up, not from worry, just habit. I opened my laptop, checked the old compliance folder. Minutes later, a new email popped up in the corner of my screen, from a familiar address, Bundesaufsichtsamt für Medizinprodukt. Licensing renewal reminder. Subject line, action required by June 17th. Immediate response needed. My name was still CC'd, a ghost of when I used to be responsible. I read it slowly, every line, every warning. The deadline had arrived. My hand hovered over the mouse, ready to forward it to Leah. I stopped. The only sound was the ticking clock in the living room and the faint hum of passing cars. I remembered Jason's words from that meeting. We don't need someone holding our hand just to sign a document. I closed the laptop. No forward. No call. I just wrote in my notebook. Reminder email received. 3:42 a.m. They won't read it. I poured a glass of water, sat down in the armchair, and watched the faint blue glow from the screen fade. Some lessons only arrive when people believe they've learned everything. And Jason, he was about to attend the most expensive class of his life. The next morning, I arrived earlier than usual. Leah wasn't in yet. Jason either. On my desk, the sticky note still sat where I'd left it. Deadline, 17/6. I took my red pen and added one more line beneath it. Countdown over. Then I sat down, opened my laptop, and began working as if nothing was about to collapse. Because the truth was, nothing of mine was. Monday morning, I arrived at the office at 7:30, earlier than usual. The glass doors were still misted over, the ceiling lights cold and pale. I made coffee, powered up my computer, and checked my inbox. Nothing. No alerts, no confirmations, just the steady silence of people who believe that if they don't look, the problem doesn't exist. By 9, footsteps started echoing through the hallway. I heard Leah laughing near the end of the corridor, her voice light, carefree, as if the only thing that mattered in life was the yoga class she'd just signed up for. Jason came in late, crisp new shirt, same rehearsed smile, the confidence of someone convinced he'd just won another round in a game only he understood. Around 11, the Slack notification chimed. A message from the Berlin office. 4 words. License portal locked. I read it again, slowly to make sure I hadn't misread. At the same moment, the phone rang on the next desk. Mark answered. His sentences came out short and broken, separated by long pauses. Then he looked at me, the look of someone who's just seen smoke behind an old wooden wall. Emma, he said quietly. They're locked out. The entire EU system. I didn't answer. I just nodded and took a sip of coffee. It was cold and bitter. I thought of the email from 3:42 a.m., the line that said action required by June 17th. No one read it. No one acted. And now everything was unfolding exactly as I expected. At 11:10, Jason appeared in the doorway, phone pressed to his ear. It's probably a system glitch, he said, voice tight but still pretending calm. Call a T. Maybe two-factor authentication's acting up. He hung up, looked around. Has anyone spoken to Berlin yet? Yeah, Mark said. Not a tech issue. They said the license expired. Access has been revoked. Jason gave a short, nervous laugh. No way. I'm sure Leah submitted it last week. Leah blinked fast, confused. I thought it updated automatically. I checked, but maybe... No, maybes, Jason snapped, louder now. We have systems in place so this doesn't happen. I set my cup down, the click loud and clean. Systems, I said. Still need someone who knows how to use them. The room went silent. Jason stared at me, the smile gone. He started to speak, but didn't. Maybe he realized there was no sarcasm in my voice, just a truth he didn't want to hear. By noon, messages from Europe started pouring in. Client access blocked. Patient data restricted. Shipment held at port. Estimated loss, $100,000 day. That number flashed across the screen like a giant exclamation mark. Jason started pacing, talking too fast, and throwing blame in every direction. Leah looked like she might cry. I just sat still, fingers around my mug, listening to the spoon clink softly against the porcelain, like a clock ticking toward impact. At 2, Jason called an emergency meeting. Everyone, packed into the room, air thick enough to choke on. He started, still trying to sound in control. This is just a small administrative error. We'll have it fixed by the end of the day. Mark asked, have you spoken with the regulator in Germany yet? Jason hesitated. I'm waiting for Leah's update. Leah's voice trembled. They they said they're out for the weekend, boss. They'll process it early next week. I looked up. It's Monday, Leah. She blinked, lost. Jason slammed his hand on the table. Fine, I'll call them myself. He stormed out, the door hitting the wall behind him. Mark turned to me. You're not going to do anything? Me? I smiled. Nothing. I was removed from the process, remember? At 2:30, a new message came from Berlin to the shared inbox. Due to non-renewal, your operating license has been suspended effective June 20th. The next line, small and sharp, daily fine, $100,000. Jason came back, pale, tie crooked. They said they'll review it. Might take a few days. A few days, I repeated. $100,000 a day. Sounds like a Santorini vacation, but pricier. Mark let out a quiet laugh, then stopped when Jason shot him a glare. By late afternoon, the office was in chaos. Emails, phones, Slack, all going off at once. Finance was calculating losses, and PR was calling from Munich. In the corner, Leah sat hunched over, hands clenched tight. I didn't hate her. She just believed in a system built by a man too arrogant to read the manual. At 5, Jason came to my desk, voice low and measured. You knew this was coming, didn't you? I met his eyes. I did. And I also knew you wouldn't listen if I told you. He exhaled hard, holding his temper. I need you to help me fix this. I shrugged. I don't have access anymore, Jason. Your assistant does. He stood there for a few seconds, then walked away. When most of the office had cleared out, I stayed behind, staring at the final message on my screen. System access denied. License expired. I wasn't happy or sad, just hollow. The kind of emptiness that comes when you see the wheel slowing down, knowing it'll crash soon, but you stay still anyway. Outside, San Francisco was turning gold with sunset, the light spilling across the glass. I shut down my computer, tidied my desk, and locked the drawer. Inside, the small USB still sat where I'd left it, tape unpeeled. I touched it once, lightly, like patting the shoulder of a fool who'd just sobered up. Tomorrow, I knew, would be worse. But tonight, I just wanted quiet. I left the lights on behind me, and as I walked down the empty hallway, I could have sworn I heard something crack, like a glass about to split, the fracture still invisible to the eye. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. Not out of duty, but out of something harder to name, an instinct. The kind that makes you stand still when you know a storm is about to break, just to watch the first flash of lightning. The glass doors still carried a mist of dew, the wooden floor still cold. I made coffee, sat at my desk, and powered on my computer. The inbox was empty. No alerts, no confirmations. Just the long, steady silence of people who believe that if they don't look, the problem doesn't exist. At 10 to 8, the first message came in from Berlin. License portal locked. Cannot access compliance dashboard. 5 minutes later, another from Warsaw. All EU accounts suspended. Client access denied. I read every word, took a sip of coffee, and felt the bitterness spread across my tongue, the kind that comes when you saw it coming, but it still stings. I set my cup down and listened as the office began to stir. Someone asked Leah what was happening. She gave a nervous smile. Probably just a glitch. Then Jason walked in, white shirt, tie slightly askew, wearing that same confident smile that now looked more like a mask than an expression. His voice rose sharp and quick. Can someone explain why our European systems are down? Mark spoke calmly, as always. Not a glitch, Jason. Legal issue. The license expired on the 17th. Jason froze. That's impossible. Leah filed the renewal. Leah swallowed hard. I sent everything in. I thought it was automated. No, Leah. I said softly but clearly. In Germany, the only thing automated is the train schedule. Silence filled the room. Jason stared at me, his face caught somewhere between anger and confusion. You knew this was going to happen, didn't you? I did, I said, but you wouldn't have let me stop it. 15 minutes later, an emergency meeting began. Jason spoke fast, his rhythm off. We'll resolve this today. It's probably an authentication issue or a system update on their side. Mark shook his head. No, they've locked us out. That means we no longer have operating rights in the EU. Leah's voice trembled. I can resend the email. Maybe they'll understand. They won't, Leah, I said quietly. They'll be fine. By 11, word had spread across the company. Overseas teams couldn't access data. Shipments were stuck at ports. The Munich client demanded a refund. Finance started calculating losses. The first line on the report read, Losses, $100,000 per day. Someone exhaled loudly. Jason clenched his fists, repeating, We'll fix this. He wasn't smiling anymore. At lunch, no one left their desks. The calls came nonstop. Germany, Poland, the Netherlands, France, all the same message. Operations suspended, no transactions, no shipments, no new contracts. The losses doubled every 24 hours. I stayed quiet. No one even noticed me. Anymore. I was part of the furniture, old, but still here. I watched Jason pacing, his voice cracking now, his sentences tripping over themselves. Emma, you used to handle this. Can you fix it? I looked at him, my tone even. I don't have access, Jason. You locked me out last month, remember? He stared for a long moment, then said, Then at least tell me what to do. Contact them, I said. Explain the error. Provide submission records, documentation, and proof of compliance. He turned to Leah. You have all that, right? She went still. The silence stretched thin. I think so, somewhere in Google Drive. No one spoke after that. At 3 p.m., Berlin sent the official notice. License deactivated. Daily penalty $100,000. Retroactive from June 20th. Jason read it and sank into his chair. The metal frame creaked, a small sound that somehow carried the weight of collapse. He buried his face in his hands. I watched, not with satisfaction, not with pity. Just a strange calm, the calm of someone who saw the fire long before the smoke and now simply watches the ashes rise. By 7 that evening, the office was still lit. People ran from desk to desk, calling, typing, trying to salvage something that had already died by morning. I stood up, packed my papers, and locked my drawer. The small USB was still there, the tape unpeeled. I touched it lightly, more habit than intention. Jason passed by my desk, voice low and worn. You know, if you'd warned me sooner. I did warn you, I said, cutting him off. You just didn't listen. He paused, eyes tired. How long until we recover? That depends, I said, on whether they still see us as a credible company. In Germany, losing trust is worse than losing a license. He didn't reply, just nodded and walked away. At 8, the office was nearly empty, only the white lights reflected in the glass and the faint shadows moving across the floor. I gathered my things, carried my cold coffee cup to the sink, and stepped into the hallway. Behind me, the sounds lingered, keyboards, sighs, phones ringing unanswered. And beneath all of it, I heard something else, the quiet, splintering sound that only experience can recognize. The sound of a system cracking. Not a dramatic collapse, just the quiet honesty of truth finally being heard. I pressed the elevator button. When the doors opened, the light on the steel walls caught my reflection. Calm, tired, but steady. The look of someone who knows the storm has arrived and is standing exactly where she needs to be. Tomorrow, I thought, won't just be about consequences. It'll be the next chapter, the one where people finally face what they built. The next morning, I didn't need an alarm. I woke before dawn, as if my body already knew something big was about to happen. I brewed a cup of black coffee and sat by the window, watching the fog sink over the city. In my mind, Jason's words from yesterday replayed: empty promises, shallow breath, and the kind of false calm that comes before a storm. I knew he wouldn't escape the one he'd created himself. When I arrived at the office, the air was thick, heavy, like a hospital waiting room. Everyone spoke softly, moved fast, eyes glued to screens. On the internal bulletin board, a new message appeared: emergency board meeting, 10:00 a.m. Attendance required. No explanation. None needed. Jason showed up late. His shirt was wrinkled. His hair was uneven. Eyes were unfocused. The man who once walked in like a spring breeze now looked like someone who'd barely survived a hurricane. He tried to act normal, but his hands kept spinning his pen unconsciously. I watched him and felt something strange, not pity, but understanding. No one falls from the top without pain. At exactly 10, the board connected over Zoom. 12 squares appeared on the screen, faces stern, tired, and cold. In the center was Parker, the CEO, with silver hair and an X-ray gaze. He started without pleasantries. "Jason, I assume you've received the notice from the German regulators." Jason nodded, his voice trembling. "Yes, sir. We're reprocessing the license. There were some misunderstandings during the transition." Parker tilted his head, his tone sharp as steel. "Misunderstandings? I'm looking at a damage report exceeding $2 million in less than 3 weeks. Do you call that a misunderstanding?" Jason opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Parker continued: "I want to know exactly who was responsible for the renewal. Names, titles, and authorization dates." I sat quietly in the back. I knew this moment would come. Jason looked around, searching for a way out. Finally, he said, "Under the new structure, I delegated the task to Leah, our operations assistant. She was following Emma's—" "No," I interrupted, my voice calm but clear enough for everyone to hear. "You didn't delegate it to Leah. You stripped my department of authority, revoked our access, and sent an email confirming I was no longer involved. I still have the copy." I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward them. On it was the email from 3 months ago. Subject line: new delegation structure, effective immediately. At the bottom, Jason's digital signature, undeniable. I scrolled further down to the note he'd written himself: all in international compliance, matters to be handled by the assistant team moving forward. The room went silent. Mark, across the table, gave me a slight nod. Parker leaned back, arms crossed. "Jason, do you confirm this is your signature?" Jason swallowed hard. "Yes, but I—" "No," but Parker cut him off, his voice dropping low. "You restructured the department, removed the company's most experienced compliance lead, handed a critical process to a junior hire, and now we've lost over $2 million. I don't see anything left to discuss." No one spoke. Even the hum of the air conditioner sounded loud. I looked at Jason and for the first time saw genuine awareness in his eyes, the kind that comes when someone finally sees the wreckage of their own making. Parker turned to me. "Emma, do you still have all the original documentation?" "I do," I said. "Files, contracts, correspondence, and verified letters from the licensing authority. Can you help us restore the process?" "I can," I answered slowly, "but it'll take time. They don't easily trust those who let the system collapse." Jason sat frozen. Parker looked back at him, voice cold as a verdict. "You'll vacate your position immediately. HR will handle your exit details. I won't use the word termination if you leave quietly." Jason lowered his head, his fists clenched. I could see him trembling, not in anger, but in defeat. When the meeting ended, he stood and walked out without looking at anyone. The soft click of the door felt like the final period at the end of a long illusion. Afterward, Parker turned to me. "The company owes you an apology, and perhaps a higher title." I smiled faintly. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Parker. I did what was right, not for a title." He nodded. "Then help us rebuild what's left." When the meeting ended, everyone left in silence. I stayed behind. The loss report still glowed on the screen, that number, $200,000, like an open wound. I took a sip of cold coffee and looked out the window. Afternoon light spilled through the glass, tracing gold across my hands. I thought of Jason, the man who believed speed was strength, who thought innovation could replace experience. Sometimes the real cost of a lesson isn't money, it's arrogance. Before leaving, I shut down my computer and glanced at the poster still hanging on the wall. Move fast or move out. I let out a quiet laugh and murmured, "Congratulations, Jason. You finally picked the right half." I turned off the light and stepped into the hallway. Behind me, the office was wrapped in silence, heavy but fair. The storm had passed, and everything was still again. But I knew that stillness wasn't the end. It was the beginning of another chapter, the one about consequence and rebuilding, where people must relearn how to respect what they once dismissed. After that meeting, the office grew so quiet you could hear the air conditioner hiss through the ceiling. Jason vanished from the building as if he had never existed. His black leather chair was still there, slowly spinning, and his unwashed coffee mug sat on the desk, the only proof that a man who once thought he was the center of the universe had ever sat there. Parker called me into his office right after Jason left. He looked at me through his thin glasses, the way someone re examines an old painting and finally sees its real worth. "Emma," he said slowly, "we need to restore the license within 3 weeks. Can you do it?" "I will," I replied, "but I'll do it my way." He nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. For the first time in 6 months, I actually feel calm hearing someone say that. I returned to my desk and opened the small USB drive I'd once labeled with a strip of tape that read, "Insurance." Everything I'd ever saved was still there: documents, emails, contacts, schedules, even handwritten notes from my meetings with the German regulators years ago. 10 minutes later, the company's compliance system came back online, finally handled by someone who knew what they were doing. I sent the first email to Berlin. No pleading, no excuses. Just one clear line. Metasphere acknowledges the lapse. We take full responsibility. The restoration process was initiated under my direct supervision. Documentation attached. 3 hours later, they replied, "We appreciate your honesty. We will review." It wasn't a promise, but it was a door slightly open, and for me, that was enough. In the days that followed, I worked almost without rest. I made calls, joined video meetings, submitted forms, and cross-checked every figure and signature. Parker allowed me to build my own support team. 4 people, including Mark. He grinned and said quietly, "Finally, we're working with someone who actually reads the regulations." I answered, "I don't need brilliant people, Mark. I need careful ones." By the second week, we received positive feedback. The temporary license was reinstated. European branches began to regain access, section by section. Each morning, logging into the system without seeing access denied felt like reclaiming a breath I'd been holding too long. But not everyone felt relieved. News of Jason's exit spread faster than any bug fix. Some people still pitied him, the kind of pity reserved for those who once believed in charming promises. I didn't blame them. In workplaces, people often trust those who speak well over those who work well. Parker met me on Friday afternoon. He placed a thick file in front of me, the title stamped across the top, Restoration Plan. "You just helped this company survive its worst crisis in history," he said. "I want you to lead global compliance. Report directly to me." I looked at him, thinking for a moment. "I don't need a title, Parker. I just want one condition. No one gets to optimize what I build again." He smiled. "Deal." When he left, I looked around the office, the desks, the coworkers who had endured months of quiet frustration. I realized then that sometimes revenge isn't about making someone fall. It's about standing taller after they do, steady and unbroken. That afternoon, I ran into Leah by the coffee machine. She stood there awkwardly, eyes uncertain. "Emma," she said softly, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to mess things up." I looked at her, my voice gentle. "I know. Don't apologize to me, Leah. Just remember, if someone ever says, 'Don't worry, it's automated now,' that's when you should start worrying." She nodded, eyes glistening a little. I didn't hate her. Truly. She was just a reflection of who I used to be, The only difference was, I'd already learned the lessons she was just beginning to face. The following week, Berlin sent the official notice: full license restored, no further penalties. When I read those words, I didn't cheer, didn't smile in triumph. I just exhaled, slow and long. Parker sent a short thank you email. You saved us. I didn't reply. Not out of pride, but because sometimes silence carries more weight than praise. On the last day of the quarter, I was invited to the all hands meeting. Parker spoke about resilience, the value of experience, and leadership lessons. I stood in the back, unnoticed, but when he mentioned the strength of calm persistence, a few eyes turned toward me. After the meeting, I went back to my office to pack up the remaining documents from Jason's desk. Among the papers, I found his ceramic mug, the one with silver letters: Innovate or Evaporate. I picked it up, turned it once in my hand, then set it in the trash. No anger, no mockery, just something that no longer belonged. On my own desk sat an old note, the edges yellowed. Deadline, June 17th. I slipped it into the drawer and didn't tear it, kept it as a reminder. As I left the office that evening, I paused by the door and looked back. The soft yellow light on the desks, the distant tapping of keyboards, the faint scent of fresh coffee. Everything looked normal again, but I knew no one in that building would ever be the same. I stepped into the hallway, the small USB still in my pocket. Outside, the sky was painted with dusk. I stopped by the glass door, saw my reflection staring back. Not the face of a victor, but of a survivor. Someone who understood that real victory isn't making others pay. It's refusing to sink with them. I smiled faintly and whispered to myself, respect isn't given, it's earned and remembered. Then I walked away without looking back. A month after the license was restored, the office returned to its usual rhythm. People laughed again, sent emails, and joined endless meetings about new strategies. On the surface, Metasphere had stabilized. But if you've ever seen a house after a fire, you know, no matter how fresh the paint or new the curtains, the smell of smoke never really leaves. I started working with the Asia team to expand new licenses. Parker called it trust, but deep down I knew it was a message: we won't repeat old mistakes. People began to look at me differently, not as the difficult woman from compliance, but as someone whose words you should probably listen to. Still, once trust is broken, it never returns the same. I found myself more tired, more cautious, and less willing to believe promises. Some afternoons, I'd sit in an empty conference room, looking out at the city, listening to the distant hum of traffic, and wonder if I'd gone too far from where I started, from the place where I once loved this job. Then, one Monday morning, Parker walked into my office. He set down a thin envelope without saying a word. I opened it. Inside was a formal letter of thanks and a bonus check. Emma, he said, slow and sincere, I owe you more than this. The whole company does, but I know you. Money was never what you wanted. I smiled faintly. No, Parker, I just want to see things run the way they should. He nodded. Then, if you want to take some time off, go. You've earned it. I looked at the envelope, then back at him. Maybe I will. And this time, no one's canceling the trip. 3 days later, I sent my resignation email. No one was surprised. Parker replied with 3 words: You've earned it. Mark left a handwritten note on my desk. Don't let anyone make you write another deadline. I kept it, folded it neatly, and slipped it into my wallet. I packed my desk on my last afternoon. No farewell gathering. That was how I wanted it. I stacked the files, shut down the computer, and wiped the desk clean until there were no coffee rings left. When I opened the drawer, the USB was still there. I picked it up, looked at it for a while, then slipped it into my bag. Not to use, but to remind myself that sometimes what you keep isn't to protect others, but to remember that you were right. When I stepped outside, the late summer sunlight reflected off the glass, spilling gold across the pavement. I stood there for a moment, taking a deep breath. No feeling of victory, just a quiet sense of release. That afternoon, I went to the airport. a ticket to London, the trip I'd canceled months before. I brought no laptop, no files, only an empty notebook and a pair of comfortable shoes. When the attendant scanned my ticket, I smiled. 6 months ago, they called this a luxury compliance tour. Now it was a real vacation. On the plane, I sat by the window, watching the city shrink below me, its lights glowing like stars, falling in reverse. I thought of Jason. Word was he'd moved to Seattle to start a small venture. I didn't hate him. Maybe somewhere out there, he'd finally learned the lesson he never grasped here, that innovation matters, but respecting what already works is a kind of creativity too. As the plane climbed higher, I opened my notebook and wrote the first line. Day 1. No emails left to check. I smiled to myself. For the first time in years, no alerts, no warnings, no emergency meetings, just silence. And sometimes silence is the greatest reward we can give ourselves. When the plane landed at Heathrow, I didn't rush to leave. I looked outside, the sky pale gray, thin rain drifting sideways. I remembered the smell of coffee from the small cafe near my old hotel. Maybe they'd still remember me. Maybe not. It didn't matter. I just wanted to walk without a badge, without the practiced face of professionalism. That evening, I sat at that same cafe by the window, espresso steaming in front of me. The owner, an older German woman with silver hair, recognized me. It's been a while, Emma, she said, her voice warm as ever. I smiled. Yes, this time not for work. She nodded. Good. Smart people need to do stupid things sometimes, like rest. I laughed. You might be wiser than all the CEOs I've worked with. Outside, the rain finally fell for real. I watched the blurred reflection in the wet glass. My face relaxed, unburdened. I took a sip of coffee, the bitterness spreading, soft and warm. I thought of the company, of Parker, of those who would stay and rebuild. I knew things would run smoothly again, not because of the systems, but because the people inside had learned to respect the invisible things: experience, patience, and the warnings they once ignored. That night, I walked along the Thames, the air damp with stone and smoke. I stopped in the middle of the bridge, watching the black water shimmer with city lights. I closed my eyes, letting the sound of the city wash over me, not deadlines or crises, but the steady pulse of a place finally at peace. When I opened my eyes, the rain had stopped. I reached into my pocket and pulled out Mark's note. The ink was smudged from the moisture. Don't let anyone make you write another deadline. I folded it back, tucked it into my notebook, and kept walking. This time, no one could cancel my trip. And if anyone ever asks what I did with my life after the storm, I'll just smile, take a sip of coffee, and say, I let my boss ruin my vacation and turned it into the best one I ever had.